What's going on, golf fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and betting preview for this week's Genesis Invitational. We've got an elevated field, we've got a track in Riviera Country Club, which is one of the most iconic in the entire country. So let's go ahead, smash out here for this epic week and talk about some of our strategies, both for betting and for the DFS side of things, to go out there and have ourselves a week. We'll talk about the golf course, some of my key stats and modeling that I'll be using for this golf tournament, and then afterwards, we'll go through some of the plays at the top of the board that I like, as well as a few outrights that I'm taking, and then towards the bottom end of the board, I go over an 8K, 7K, and a 6K player over there on the DFS side of things that are catching my eye from that format. So a lot to get into here. Let's go ahead and start it off with a look at the golf course of the week. Riviera Country Club is normally extremely difficult, but here in 2024, I think we see a slightly easier version of it. So rather than playing something over par between even and maybe one over, I think we're going to see something slightly under par this year. The main reason for that, some of the weather they've gotten over the last 4 or 5 weeks. They've gotten over 7 inches in this area, which is normally about the amount of rain they get in an entire year, right? An entire calendar year, they've gone in a less than a 4-week stretch. So these greens are going to be soft. The fairways aren't going to have all that much run out to them. In this golf course, its main defense is that ball striking difficulty, which you get with firm and fast conditions, and also how hard these greens are to putt with slower green speeds, also with a little bit less break that you're going to have to play this week. I do think that you're going to see people take advantage of this golf course if you can keep the ball in play, right? If you're missing in that 2-inch Kikuyu grass, if you are missing around the green regularly, you aren't going to score very well, but you do have the opportunity to throw some darts out there and probably hit a few more fairways than usual. So in terms of our approach weighting, it's actually a little bit less on a year like this because of how receptive the greens are going to be. And if you take a look at some of the approach distribution, we're going to be looking a little bit more at this 150 plus yard range. So 150 to 175 is utilized about 10% more than your PGA Tour average course. 175 to 200 is about a 5-6% difference in the direction of higher out there for this golf course. And then everything from 200 yards plus is actually right about tour average. So if there's going to be 2 proximity buckets that you really hone in on, should be these 2 middle tier ranges from 150 out there to 200 yards. In terms of off the tee, I do think driving distance is going to be a much larger factor this year than what we've had in the past 4 or 5 seasons at the Genesis. A lot of that because of the lack of rollout, also the added distance that this course is going to play with the wet conditions is, I think, going to put a lot more emphasis on the off the tee play. So that's something that I'm changing. I'm out here for 2024. Normally this would be key stat number 3 or 4 in our model for the Genesis, but because of the changing conditions, it's up there at number 2. Birdie or better percentage with dartboards, right? I think these guys are going to get after it. So I want players that can go out there, be aggressive, and fill it up with the flat stick. In terms of your putter, over there on POA greens, you can look at POA baseline, also some of your recent form. Course history is extremely sticky around this golf course, so it is significantly weighted in my modeling. In fact, even more than around the green, which is normally one of the more important stats around this venue, along with those soft conditions, which make maybe your approach play a little bit less important, your off the tee maybe a little bit more important. It also takes away from the around the green play. When you're going to hit more greens, when you're going to have slower green speeds, less tricky shots around the green, you're not going to have as much emphasis on that department. So down there at number 6 would usually be number 3 or 4 on a week like this, and the course conditions are why we're doing that. In terms of your comps, I've got the Masters, Memorial, also the Houston Open down there. 3 difficult tracks with a lot of mid to long irons, and on top of that, some tricky greens to deal with. So normally these would be even better comps than what we're going to get for this week. I do think that the soft conditions maybe actually make it play a little bit more like the Masters, because we don't normally get a super firm and fast Augusta, right? I mean, it'll play about average in terms of its firmness. Super fast greens, that's for sure over there at Augusta. But I think this week, the iron play and the way that the ball is going to react on some of those green complexes is going to be pretty similar to what we get at the Masters. So rather than an extremely firm and fast track like we're used to over here at Riviera Country Club, I think it's going to be about a tour average course in terms of how firm and how fast everything's going to run out there. So with that being said, what types of players am I looking at? And to this point, I've only got one outright in, and it's going to be our first core play. And it's a player that I don't really like all that much. Rory McIlroy is just not my favorite player. There's a lot that goes into that, so we won't have that conversation here, but I do like him for this golf tournament. And if you see me playing Rory, taking him as a core play, going out there and betting him outright, there's usually a pretty good reason for it. And it all comes down to how this golf course is going to play. If we think it's going to play longer, if we think that it's going to be a lot of those mid to long irons that players are going to be hitting, that's exactly what we want with a Rory McIlroy, right? From 125 yards and in, even this 125 to 150 range, he is well outside the top 50 on tour in terms of efficiency with some of those wedges. Whereas you put him from 150 yards and out, and he is one of the best players on the PGA Tour. We know that he's one of the longest players, so if we're looking at driving distance this week, that's going to be a huge factor too. And his course history isn't all that bad to boot. So if we go over here to the event history, you'll see that the last 3 years have maybe not been up to his standards, right? 29th, 10th cut. That's not getting it done for Rory McIlroy. But back there in 2020 and 2019, you had a 5th, also a 4th place finish. So clearly has gone out there and done it before. And I think the conditions this time around are perfectly set up for his game. So rather than go out there and take, Scotty Scheffler, who's always pretty much a really good pick. I mean, even Xander, Victor Hovland down there, Max Homa are all pretty decent plays on this kind of slate. It kind of feels like Rory McIlroy is going to go a little bit overlooked. I mean, if we look at the recent form, he's got the second worst form of any of those top 5 players. Max Homa, slightly worse form, but Rory McIlroy at $11,200. Is number 23 in recent form ranking. So that has me thinking that he's going to be slightly lower owned than he probably should be. We don't have ownership projections here on a Tuesday yet, but I'd imagine that he's going to be in that 10, maybe 15% range when it comes to his exposure, which is a number that I'd be willing to get well over the field on. So I got him at 10 to 1 for a little outright. He's actually the only outright that I've placed at this point. So I put quite a few units behind Rory McIlroy. So once again, I don't love playing the guy. There's a lot that goes into that, a lot about his media and what he'll say out there. I just think that he's not very genuine, which is why I'm not a huge Rory McIlroy fan, but I am a really big fan of his game, right? Gains on POA, number 2 in long-term course fit around a Riviera Country Club, who I believe is only behind Scotty Scheffler when it comes to that course fit angle. So Scotty Scheffler, if you're going to play him this week, I think it's totally fine. Just try and get a little bit over the field. But the one that I'll be taking from the outright market, and then I'm going to try and get leverage to in DFS, is a lower owned Rory McIlroy. Next up, we've got Patrick Cantlay, who I took for a top 5 bet at plus 400. So no outright with Patrick Cantlay, and he's going to be your lowest owned player in this range. Barring any sort of crazy ownership changes, it looks like Cantlay, because of his recent form, might even be sub like 12% owned, which Cantlay is usually pretty popular. I think $9,300 is more than fair enough for Patrick Cantlay. And the whole reason I'm playing him, we'll talk about the top 5. I think those are decent odds out there as well. But for DFS, you're looking at a leverage play with Patrick Cantlay, which is not something we get very often. And if you take a look at his event history here, it's been okay, right? He's been very consistent here. 3rd last year, 33rd, 15th, 17th, also a 15th back there 5 years ago. And last year, that 3rd place finish came after a missed cut at the WM, and his form's not great, right? If we go up here and look at, Patrick Cantlay, he had 11th at Pebble, which is just okay for him, right? That's kind of what we expect from a Patrick Cantlay. T56, T52, T12. So not great form coming in. That's why the shots gained metrics have him as the 49th ranked player in terms of recent form. But here's the kicker. Last year at the WM Phoenix Open, missed the cut. Goes out there and finishes in 3rd place. You look at some of these other finishes where he's finished like top 15, right? 17th there 4 years ago. Had come in with dreadful form in the past, and then goes out there and absolutely spikes. In fact, this T33 2 years ago was after a 2nd place finish at the WM. So it's almost like if he comes in with good form, he'll play real shitty at this golf tournament. Whereas if he's coming in without any sort of form is when you've seen these top 15s in that 3rd place last year. Now, I don't think we can count on that. Obviously, I'd rather have a Patrick Cantlay that's coming in with some sort of form. But if that's going to make him unowned, right? I mean, he's going to be lower owned than a Morikawa. He's going to be lower owned than an Aberg, Thomas, and a Spieth, I would have to imagine. If that's going to happen, I think that's a massive mistake. You're talking about somebody that's gone out and won after missing cuts before. A guy that goes out there, finishes top 5 all the time after having really shitty weeks the week before. He's the type of guy that turns it around in a hurry, and I think in DFS is going to be a piece of leverage that you can get to. So the top 5 bet I took at plus 400. I was doing some line shopping. I believe he was plus 375 on sites like like Draftkings and FanDuel. That was yesterday, so there could have been a little bit of line movement there, but kind of like the Rory McIlroy bet I put in, but quite a few units on Patrick Cantlay to finish top 5. So part of that was because of the line we were getting. It was at the time the best line value in the entire industry. And on top of that, right, long term, right, if we zoom out, kind of ignore that recent form stretch, which is still included with the long-term stuff, right? That recent form is still part of that long-term form. He's number 8 in the field. So even with that little bit of a dip of late, is still one of the better players on the slate and somebody that I think is going to be slept on for some of the exposure this week. And now finally for our last core play, which I want to put a bet in on Tony Finau. I just can't find the type of odds that I'm looking for. So I've held off for now, but in terms of DFS, he is going to be a huge piece of my player pool. Now, something I wanted to mention about Rory and Cantlay that I kind of forgot to get to here was that they can move the ball in both directions. The Genesis Invitational, the reason why I use Augusta National as my #1 comp is shot making is required there, right? There are dog legs in both directions. If you can't move the ball in one direction or the other, you're pretty much going to have an impossible time hitting fairways. Rory is very comfortable moving in both directions. Patrick Cantlay is a little bit more of a draw bias, right? You know, doesn't hit a fade as often as what you'll see with the draw with Patrick Cantlay, particularly off the tee, but he can still hit that fade. So you've got two players that can shot make it in both directions. And Tony Finau's the same way. Another guy that favors that draw ball flight, kind of like you have with the Patrick Cantlay, but if you ask him to go out there and hit a fade, he's more than willing to do that as well. So I like that in terms of the course setup. He's also a power player, very similar to a Rory McIlroy that takes advantage of that driving distance. And here in 2024, Tony Finau has been a lot better off the tee. In fact, he's starting to swing harder. He's talked about that in a few interviews about trying to gain some potential distance. And at a golf course that I think is going to be off the tee heavy, approach play is going to matter. He also has an excellent track record around this golf course. He's a spot in DFS that I think is going to be about average in terms of the ownership and give you a pretty good chance to go out there and get some leverage. So obviously has been okay here the last 5 years. His best start was a second place there 3 years ago, also a T15 out there 5 years ago. And in terms of your course fit, I mean, the recent form is why I'm the most excited, but long-term course fit, he pretty much does exactly what we want, right? Maybe not the best putter on these tricky greens, might trip him up a little bit, but gaining close to a stroke per round on approach, gaining almost half a stroke per round off the tee, which had gone into the negative for him for quite a bit there in 2023. So it's good to see him out there gaining prolifically with the driver again, and then the putter has held him back. But on POA, now, here's where I really like him this week, right? He gained strokes on the POA newest surface. In fact, he's 0.88 strokes better per round on POA than he is compared to any other surface on tour. So if we're talking about a guy that should regress positively with the flat stick this week, has already been doing his thing with the ball striking. Tee to green has been solid over the last 12 measured rounds. At a golf course that he's spiked at in the past, I love that kind of upside. So I do think the ownership is at least going to be average. I'm out there with the Tony Finau. Like I said, it wouldn't surprise me to see him around 15% by the time we get to lock on Thursday. But at the kind of number, still gives you a chance to take him 30, maybe 35% of your lineups and go out there and get some leverage. Before we hop into our value plays, I will say if you want access to everything that is blacked out on these videos I do, make sure to check out the Patreon. There's a link down in the description of the video. On there, so I post all these spreadsheets, whether it's for my projected points, ownership, player pool, all the different research that you see on here can be directly accessed yourself through my Patreon page. So gives you a way to go ahead, use them for your own process, right? Copy and paste the projections into your optimizer, getting a good idea for how I'm handling any given slate. So if that's something you've been looking for, check it out down below and get all of that for yourself. Next up, we've got Adam Scott as our first value play, who's a little bit more expensive than most of my value plays, but I wanted to fit them into this video. So normally I go 8K and below for these values, but Adam Scott was just too good a play to pass up. Now the ownership here, I'm thinking is going to be extremely high. In fact, it would not surprise me to see a 20-25% owned Adam Scott, which if you're trying to get leverage, if you need to get different here in the 8K range, he is not going to get that done for you. But what I love, and it is ridiculous, the form for Adam Scott is top notch. He is number 4 in the field when it comes to recent form ranking. He's got a good long-term fit too, where he's number 9 in the field, despite being number 18 in the pricing. And on top of that, he's got amazing course history here. He's got multiple wins. He's got like 4 or 5 top 5 finishes out here at the Genesis Invitational. Now, of late, right, he has that win, what was it, 4 years ago, T7. The last 3 years have been a little bit hit and miss, with a 65th, a 38th, but a 4th there 2 years ago. He is the perfect example, right, of somebody who long-term crushes at this golf course, who has a track record of crushing at this golf course, and is coming in playing some of the best golf of his life. Now, that's why the ownership is going to be there. The reason why I'm not fading it is, I mean, he kills this place, right? He's like a Bubba Watson, and this is a golf course where course history is among the most sticky on all the PGA Tour. They've got Augusta National where it's up there, where a lot of times the chalk ends up hitting. And at a golf course like this, where it is so predictive from year to year, I think there's a good argument for wanting to play Adam Scott. Now, the counter argument here is that the conditions are going to be a little bit softer than what we're used to seeing. So maybe you fade him, hope that it plays differently and that he's not comfortable out there at Riviera Country Club. But that's not something that I'm going to do out there with his total model ranking, right? He's my number 4 ranked player in the field, despite being number 18 in the pricing. Just a value that, you know, I'm not going to pass up, right? If he's going to be extremely high owned, I'll make the lineups work around him. We have plenty of other spots that we can differentiate our builds and get some of that leverage that we're looking for. And just because we use, you know, maybe a 20% owned Adam Scott in lineups is not going to completely tank our chances of succeeding. So obviously, if all of your players are going to be like 20, 25% owned, you probably want to reevaluate your process. But if you only have, you know, an Adam Scott in there, then a bunch of pivots, you're going to be just fine out there for your GPP lineup. So in terms of an outright bet, maybe from the betting market, I am looking at a potential top 20 bet, but mostly from the DFS side that I'll be getting my exposure to Adam Scott. Next up, we got the bottom end of the 7s. I'd say actually mid-level of the 7s here with Hideki Matsuyama. And I think this is a severe misprice. You've got a player that takes care of hard golf courses. Augusta National, our number 1 comp course, played softer the year that Hideki Matsuyama won. So not only has he played well at a lot of the other comps, I mean, Houston Open has played extremely well. Memorial also has a few other top-end finishes. Firestone, another course that I use as a comp this week, is a course that he's won at multiple times. He's starting to play better. I think he's criminally mispriced and at the best comp we can possibly think of, right? Masters in very wet conditions, right? It rained super hard after round 2. He went out there and shot like -10 his last 2 rounds and absolutely tore it apart. This golf course isn't going to be a replica of what we had at the Masters, but it's pretty damn close. And for somebody to only be $7,400, who's a major champion, who the form isn't amazing of late, but it's also not like terrible for Hideki Matsuyama, I'm going to be a huge buyer. In fact, he's a gainer in every category but the flat stick, and kind of like we had with a Tony Finau, he's a player that raises his baseline on the POA surface. You can see a slight gainer for his career on POA Anua, and you can see compared to his 36-round baseline, that is 0.7 shots better than what he's been doing of late. So I would expect to see a little bit of putting regression out there for Hideki, a lot of good comp courses that, you know, give us a lot of hope out there for Hideki, and of late has started to play a lot better, right? You know, over there in 2023 was losing with the approach play a lot, was not very sharp off the tee. It looks like he's getting back to that ball striking monster that we know him to be, which is extremely dangerous at this kind of golf course. So I think that the pricing this week is pretty soft, right, because of how strong the field is. But for somebody like Hideki to be $7,400 is a massive mistake in my opinion. And now finally, our last play is the whole way down at $6,000. So yeah, we're going the whole way to the bottom of the board, a minimum price type of play, and it's Sam Ryder at $6,000. And there's a few reasons for this. And just to give you an idea of why I think he's such a misprice, let's look at the last 36 rounds. So this is, you know, a 9-event sample. If you made all your cuts, probably closer to like 10 to 12 events, including your missed cuts. He's gaining almost a stroke per round on approach. And I mean, if we go through this range, right, Gary Woodland, really solid approach player. Unfortunately, right, a lot of his sample is from 2023. You have guys down here, 0.6 strokes on a Smalley, 0.4 on a Hoffman and a JJ Spawn. Then you've got Sam Ryder doubling all of them up. We know that approach play is the most consistent, the most predictive stat out there from golf tournament to golf tournament. And for somebody that maybe doesn't have the best course history, I think you might start to see that at some point, right? The last 2 years has gone out there, had top 26 finishes, missed the cut 4 years ago, T56 5 years ago is not what we're looking for. But Sam Ryder is turning into a legit golfer. I mean, this approach play has been extremely valuable for him, starting to make a lot more cuts, also starting to get more of those ceiling performances. And if we zoom in on him a little bit, he's not had the best recent form here. He's still doing it with the approach play, right? He might be losing off the tee, actually might be losing with the putter, which is not something that he typically does, but is still absolutely striping it with the approach play. So that's why I like taking him down here. I think he's a solid $600 too cheap on this kind of slate, and I don't think he's going to be mega chalk, right? Now, we only have 70 players in the field, so he might be closer to like 3, 4, maybe even 5% ownership. But taking 10% of Sam Ryder and getting that leverage is far from unreasonable on this kind of slate. So that's what I'll be doing. You'll see on POA, right, gains about 0.31 shots per round in terms of his flat stick, which compared to his 36 round baseline is a whole 0.56 shots better, right? So again, another player we'd expect to regress positively out there with the flat stick, and has been unbelievable with the iron play, right? I mean, last 36 rounds, right, speak for themselves out there. Event history, I mean, top 20, top 26 finish. We'd be pretty okay with that, right? Out there at $6,000 is a reason why I think he's worth taking in lineups. And on top of the fact that I think he just fits this golf course well, it's not who you're getting, right, at $6,000. A lot of times that's what it buys you up top, right, is the utility in taking somebody the whole way at the bottom of the board. So by taking a $6,000 Sam Ryder, we increase our average salary significantly, right, for our last 5 spots. And maybe if you really wanted to start Scotty and then Rory McIlroy as your top 2 players, he's the type of player that can make that happen, right? Or even if you want to go with like a Rory and then maybe 2 9K players, or, you know, a Rory, or even just like 3 or 4 9K players, right, and start that way, you can make that kind of lineup work if you punt with a $6,000 player like Ryder. So that's the strategy out there with taking him. He's number 27 in my total model ranking, despite being number 68 in the pricing. Just a value that I can't pass up, and somebody that'll open up a lot of flexibility with your builds. That's all I've got for this week's Genesis Invitational preview. Hopefully you feel a little bit more prepared to go out there, get your research started. You can go out there and have yourself a week for this elevated field event. Appreciate the support here. Go ahead, smash that like button on your way out of here, and also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already so don't miss any of the content to come. We'll have our live stream tomorrow evening, Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern time, so make sure to keep an eye out for that. Bring any questions you've got. We'll talk weather, ownership, strategy out there for GPPs, some props on underdog and prize picks. Make sure you have all the info you need heading into lock to have yourself a Genesis Invitational. Again, guys, appreciate all the support here. Best of luck with all that exposure you're getting to. And before you get out of here, if you guys have any hot takes for your winner, the only rule is they have to be 15 to 1 or more. Go ahead and let me know down in chat. Looking for some potential outright bets that are at some higher odds, preferably like 40 or 50 to 1 or higher, because we already have Rory there at 10 to 1. So give me a few ideas down below. Help me build the rest of my betting card, and let me know some of your hot takes of the week. That's all I've got, though. Appreciate all the support here on the channel, and I'll catch you guys for that live stream on Wednesday night.